my great pleasure this evening to welcome Carolyn Kennett, who's going to speak to us about Moonlit Monuments. Excuse me, exploring the lunar standstill season at prehistoric sites in the granite uplands of the southwest. Carolyn has been doing some fascinating exploration of how the sky, I'll put it as broad as that, back in the day relates to the positioning of prehistoric monuments. If you have any questions for Caroline, can you put them in the chat box, please? And turn off your screens if you can, and mics, because that'll help enable the broadband, the internet. So over to you, Caroline.
Thank you, Jenny. Right, I'm going to share my screen. There we go. Like that. Okay, I think that's all shared. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay, and thank you ever so much for inviting me to talk this evening. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces online, and I'm pleased that my topic has interested so many more people out there, that you've all put down your dinners and switched off the telly and come along tonight to listen to my talk. I started this probably this last 18 months being a little bit more focused on the moon, and I'm going to come into the reason why that was in a moment. But it's been a fascinating 18 months. Most of my research up until that point has been pretty solar focused, so it was a really special time to focus on a different aspect of the cosmos. And really, this is kind of one of the parts at the start of the journey. And sorry, Mike, the back of your head there, but we're down at Boscanoon Stone Circle in West Cornwall in Penwith, and we're there on an auspicious day. It's the summer solstice. We've just had summer solstice sunset. That's why there's quite a large gathering. This is just a collective of people that had gone down there. Some people knew each other, some people were just down there to experience that sunset moment. I'd gone down for a slightly different reason. I'd seen sunset from Boscanoon before and recorded it. I wanted to, in fact, look in the other direction, and that's what the little group towards the back there is doing there. And I was waiting for the moonrise, and there it is in the background, this full moon rising on what was the solstice in 2024. I wanted to record where it rose on the horizon and start to think about different aspects of the moon and what was going to happen in the year coming up around rise and set positions of the moon. But as I started watching, I realized that people were pretty transfixed by the moon. And it wasn't just an object which you could record rise and set, because the moment that it rose against the horizon was lost in the daylight. It took a while for it to reach an elevation where you could actually see the moon. But as it got dark that night, with this wonderful, gloriously clear sky, which is quite unusual for Cornwall, the moonlight itself became quite fascinating to me. And moonlight itself is quite an intriguing concept and prospect to try and research. And I thought, well, maybe as I'm going out looking at these different ideas around the moon over the next 18 months, I'll also consider different aspects of what moonlight does to prehistoric sites, or what it does to people when we go out and visit them, contemporary. And I started to think about different ideas I could explore that. So what is moonlight? Well, moonlight was written about here by a lady, and it was written about quite a long time ago. And she's put, in our day when we live so much by artificial illumination, we seldom revel in the transformational scenes which take place under the magic spell of moonlight. the mysterious glamour which it casts over the scene, concealing harsh outlines crude in the glare of sunlight. One longs for the evening and the hour of sunset, when it is time of full moon, the queen of night, who will weave her magic spell by illuminating the scene with her light. Now, I'm just going to move all our little faces out of the way again. That was written nearly 100 years ago by an astronomer who was a British American astronomer. She spent part of her time in the UK lecturing, but she also travelled quite extensively and lectured quite extensively in America. She was already writing a lot about the moon, and she was very concerned about modern illumination, electronic lighting, and what that did to moonlight. And it's interesting, as we switch on our lights, one of the first things that the loss of dark skies does is actually remove moonlight itself. So I realized when I was researching, I was going to have to put myself into some quite dark spaces, which we are quite lucky in Cornwall and over on Dartmoor as well, to have those dark skies where I could investigate moonlight a little bit more at some of the prehistoric sites that we have. When I set off on this journey, I was hoping for lots of skies and opportunities to see the moon under skies like this, nice and clear. This is a lovely full moon setting over Fern Acre on Bodmin Moor. The past 18 months has been a little bit more like this, which is fairly typical. I took a group out, a very hardy group. We went out for a dawn moonset, and this was a photograph of us at the Menontoll in rather strange, eerie conditions where the moonlight itself was actually coming through the thick cloud because the moonlight itself was very strong that night. And it's a very eerie feeling with the bluey, silvery glow that it casts down onto the terrestrial sphere. And even through the cloud, we could still wander about at night. It was so bright, the moon, that night, even though it was a bit of a murky night to be out and about. I'm just going to give you a little bit about why the moon light changes and fluctuates. It's rather obvious to most of us, but I don't want to tell you that how to suck eggs. But the moon goes through phases as it travels round the Earth, and as sunlight shines on the face of the moon, as it travels round the Earth, we get to see different levels of that illuminated face. So during its 29.5-day passage round us, we go from seeing no moon all the way up to full moon and back again. But what is interesting is the amount of illumination that reaches us here at Earth. At no moon, we get no illumination. That's fairly obvious. And at full moon, we get 100% illumination. But it's not that at that half moon, we would get 50% illumination by the moon. We get much less. So the moon is only incredibly bright and illuminating the landscape and giving us the ability to continue on with everyday tasks at night about 3 days before and after the full moon itself. So there is a key moment in and around that full moon where the moon's illumination allows for people to continue on with tasks later into the darkness and the night time. What actually happens is at full moon, we never really leave nautical twilight. We certainly don't leave astronomical twilight. So we're not in proper nighttime when we have a full moon. We don't get that complete darkness that you can get on a new moon night where it's completely black as night and you can't really see much as you're out and about. But with full moon, we've got quite enough light, particularly when we don't have lots of man-made illumination around. If we've got those dark skies, you can certainly wander about at full moon quite happily. for the whole night. But the other aspect of what's been going on this year and why the moon has been my focus was that the moon is at an extreme of its cycle. And I don't want to go into a long explanation about this, but if we were to go out and see the full moons rise and set, the furthest north that a full moon would rise and set during the course of this year would be in and around the winter solstice. And the full moon rise and set around the summer solstice would rise and set very far to the south. So we're going to see, we see these extreme rise and set positions along the horizon. So every 27.3 days, that moon oscillates up and down the horizon, its rise and set position. But we're in the year where we'll see the moon rise furthest to the north and furthest to the south. It does do this at all these other phases as well. So this is why it gets a little bit complicated. But if we're thinking about the full moon and the illumination of the full moon, it's around the winter solstice that we're going to see it rise and set furthest to the north. And why that is interesting, because beyond its rise and set furthest to the north, we're also going to see it elevate extremely high in the sky and be in the sky during nighttime for a long period of time. Whereas around the summer solstice, that elevation is going to be very low. And I'll show you a site in a moment, and me recording that summer low rise and set point, and the elevation doesn't get very high at all, which means that the moon travels in an area of the sky where there is a lot of that atmosphere. And if you're thinking of sunsets, it's where you would get those reddy coloured skies and the red moons coming through, and the moon is sitting in that region of the sky. So beyond Boscanoon, one of the main sites that I want to talk about is the Stripple Stones. And I found myself out here back in August 24, and I was there for an evening, well, the afternoon and into the evening of the moon rising and setting at its most southern. So I was fairly close to that summer solstice rise and set, but it wasn't going to be a full moon. It was just post-full itself. Why did the Stripple Stones interest me? Well, one of the things I like to do is look at what antiquarians have written about, or people in history have written about sites, and look at their interpretations and to see if there's any kind of meterage in their interpretations of the sites. And we've had quite a few people make claims about the standstill year. And the standstill year, I should say, only comes round every 18.6 years. So that's why it was important to focus on that this last year. And it would take another 18.6 years for it to come round as we move out of it now. But Audrey Burl had made an interesting observation that if you're at the Stripple Stones, there would be an alignment at the Stripple Stones with that standstill rise and set position. So it's the rising northern moon. And it's to do with the bank as much as the stone circle. So this plan shows you a stone circle. You can see the black hatchets of the stones. It's got a central stone, and then it's got an exterior bank. So it's in a henge. Now, what is interesting about this plan, it's quite an old plan, this one, are these semicircular protrusions on the bank itself. And Audrey Burl felt that if you were stood in the bottom southwest corner, overlooking that central stone to that northeast protrusion, so the semicircular protrusion, you would see the moon rise behind that protrusion. I was going to go back and check that, but when I went out for the southern one, I realized that it was quite difficult to check because the protrusions itself have almost but disappeared from the actual site. And this is a much more up-to-date plan, which James Gossip kindly let me show you. And you can see that over time, since the last 100 years or so, those protrusions have pretty much disappeared and are very difficult to make out. And certainly the one which was in the northeast side of the bank itself, it has had that hedgerow be built in and over where that protrusion would have been. So it would be very difficult to make those observations. So I was out for that southern rise and set, so in the opposite direction. Similar idea. I thought I could stand on the northern end of the bank, overlook where that standing stone is, and towards the other side, so where the southern moon would set itself. And I'll show you a little video, so a little time lapse that I recorded looking out in that direction, just to show you where the moon was. The moon is the little white dot in the sky to the left. And that was about 40 minutes of time lapse. What you can see perhaps there is that the moon itself wasn't going to get any higher in the sky that night. That was the highest point of elevation. And it was already starting to move into setting position. Sorry, I've clicked backwards. There we go. Hold on a sec. There we go. So that is the highest elevation that the moon rose the whole of that evening at that southern rise and set at that standstill. And it's sweeping across that landscape to the south before setting in the direction of a hill range over towards St Austell. Now, the St Austell hill range has, for anyone who's Cornish knows, it's been heavily manipulated. It has an industrial china clay pit, which means that much of that hill range is different to how it used to be. But there has been a lot of archaeological work done over at St Austell. And it was while I was sitting there watching this moon approach its setting position and looking at those man-made lights that I remembered from the depths of my brain, an article which had appeared in your journal, the CAU's journal, CAS's journal, about some of the barrows on the top of those hills. And what would have happened, so this is a Google map, so the Stripple Stones is off to the top right of this map, and the sight line of where that moon set is at the end of the yellow line, but this moon is going to sweep along the top of these hills, and all the red areas are areas which are completely visible from the Stripple Stone. So there's good visibility in that direction. Carlotta number 3 is one of these barrows where it would have set above, but it's not the only one. And there's a number of barrows within those hilltops which would have been visible in the past from the Stripple Stone. And these barrows, interestingly, have been topped by yellow clay at certain times within their history. And Henrietta Quinnell, who I believe is online tonight, has kindly let me reproduce this picture of the Watch Hill Barrow, which is being excavated, showing you really the deepness of colour of these barrows, which are along this hilltop. And it did make me start to think about the colour yellow and the moonlight, and whether there could have been anything within that which people might have wanted to experience these yellow-topped barrows with certain moonlight conditions. Yellow is a particular colour which we're highly sensitive to in low light conditions, and certainly emergency vehicles, school buses and areas, yellow lines on the ground. They're there because we can see them under low light conditions. Our eyes are quite incredible things when we start to move into darkness. And that yellow-green hue is the last colour that we see. As we start, after the sunset, it takes about 40 minutes for our eyes to fully adapt to dark sky or low light conditions. And as I said before, under a full moon, we wouldn't fully need to adapt because we're not going to go into full nighttime. We would probably still see the yellow, and that's what I wanted to still explore. But we would eventually move into a very monochrome black and white vision. I did do a very similar project a while ago at the Hurlers. It was a few years back, and it was with a colleague and friend of mine. And we were there on the night of a full moon. And the Hurlers is a triple stone circle site on Bodmin Moor for people who aren't familiar with that site. And we went out with a length of yellow cloth because we were thinking about a pavement which had been excavated and had been recovered over. And Alan's kindly let me use this photograph of the pavement during the excavation, which was led by Jackie Navastowski and James Gossip. And within the pavement, these stones were put into kind of a yellow-grey clay. And so we couldn't recreate that under moonlight because after the excavation, the pavement had been recovered over by the turf. So we took out a yellow piece of cloth and waited for a night of full moon. And then we put a drone up to record how the yellow cloth worked, how visible it would be under different lighting conditions. So this is the yellow cloth after sunset, so what is called civil twilight. And I did have my drone there, but thankfully I got saved by another local drone flyer. This was pre-needing licenses, so he was very kind and he took some better shots than I would have ever done. This is the yellow cloth there down the bottom. So this is in the period of nautical twilight. So you can still see there's a sunset. There's all those colours going on at nautical twilight. The moon has already risen by this point, and the yellow is really visible, as is Brian's fluorescent gear. And there we are in moving into astronomical twilight, and you can still see just that yellow cloth. It's starting to get quite dull there, but it's just an interesting thought. Was the yellow chosen specifically to be seen under low light or moonlight conditions? So with that idea, I've spent some time with Catherine Sawyer out on the Isles of Scilly, and we're here visiting a few years ago, Crothers Hill, entrance graves on St Martin's. And this last autumn, I was out there under a full moon. I was lucky enough to get some clear skies, and I packed my yellow cloth into my baggage allowance, and off I went and put it out under the full moon. So here it is under nautical twilight to take some images again. The reason why I was particularly interested in taking my yellow cloth idea out to the Isles of Scilly is that they have a site there which has did have a lot of yellow clay deposit. It was a site called Knacky Boy on St Martin's itself, and I'm about as close as I could get to Knacky Boy here. It's very, very overgrown, but there isn't much left to see of Knacky Boy. It's an entrance grave, a Solonian style entrance grave, and it was excavated back in the 1950s by O'Neill. And this is a plan of Knacky Boy. It's orientation is directly east, so it's the entrance to it there is at the bottom of the piece of paper, and you've got the chamber going in and various elements there. But it's a really interesting excavation, really interesting finds. But one of the things about Naki Boy is that it had a considerable spread of clay within the interior of the chamber. And it was so liberally spread within the interior of this chamber that Catherine has put in her PhD about these entrance grades that it could have possibly been decorated. There was that much clay put inside. As part of the excavation, they found what they termed a possible libation stand, and that's an image of it there. So you can get an idea about the colour, although I do understand that clay perhaps changes colour over time. But although they describe it as a grey buff mortar or clay, it's certainly got quite a yellow hue. And when you start to look at the different sites on the Isles of Scilly, clay has been used in quite a few of them. And sometimes, this is a list of some of the other sites on the Isles of Scilly where clay has been mentioned, it is described as yellow. Sometimes it's described as this grey buff, and other times the actual colour is not specified. But it was an interesting thought that you could have these passageways into a tomb in which clay is applied to the walls, particularly if it was yellow in colour, with the idea of having an alignment with either a sun or a moon shining in there and illuminating the chamber. Now, the closest I've got to reimagining that so far is by sending a friend who was over there on the summer solstice to go into Porth Hellet and photograph the sunlight coming into the chamber. And this is what they were able to photograph. So Porth Hellet is aligned to the summer solstice sunset. And if you're inside that chamber, that golden sunlight shines inside. But if you were to think if you were at Naki Boy and there's a yellow kind of grey clay applied to the walls, and then the moonlight shines in, you would probably have a similar effect, a golden illumination of the interior of the chamber. And it's a possible reason why they might have decided to apply some of that clay into the interior of it. So I wanted to conclude this little bit before moving on to the next part of the talk. Any yellow clay effects, I think, will have been timed for celebrations at the full moon, so maximising that light. In the standstill year, it could certainly be more pronounced. So at that southern standstill with that full moon, you're going to get the moon not elevating very high in the sky, and it's going to skim across things and already have quite a reddy orangey hue to the light. And if you've then applied yellow clay to things, it's just going to add to that effect. But what about the white? So as I said, as we move into the night, our eyes certainly move into the monochrome. So we have elements of monuments where white as a colour has been chosen to be part of those monuments. And I went back out with my cloths. This is a group that we went up Castle and Venus near Wadebridge under the night of a full moon. And this time I took a yellow cloth and I took a white cloth and I also took a brown cloth because I just wanted to see the difference in those effects between those three different range of colours and the moonlight itself. And we allowed the moon to rise. And this is as the moon has risen up, you can see the white cloth to the left is incredibly bright still. The browny, orangey one less so. The yellow one, you can still see a bit of colour, but it's losing colour quite quickly at this stage. So white is certainly if you were going to include a colour which you wanted to be seen quite clearly under low light conditions, white would be quite a good choice to go for. And here I am back at Boscanoon, and that is the quartz stone, and in the middle under a low light condition. And you can see the middle quartz stone there under the low light is probably brighter than the granite stone to the right of it. And certainly quartz has been used in lots of different monuments around Cornwall and Devon. And I've not had a huge amount of time to explore the effects of moonlight and quartz in itself, but I know Andy Jones was particularly interested in that, and he's written a little bit about that. And that's something that I would like to continue in exploring with the different sites and the different materials and thinking about moonlight and those white colours. But quartz is certainly one area that I would like to go and continue researching. Here I am over on Dartmoor. So I've left Cornwall now and I'm over the Tamar in Devon. And this is a site called Downtor Stone Row or Hingston Hill Stone Row. And I'm visiting here with an artist called Sophie Mayer. And she is sat there off to the right-hand side. We're quite hopeful that that storm isn't coming in our direction. She's sewing a piece of white cloth. So one of the things that we also started to think about, chatting with Sophie and myself, was what happens if people had interventions at sites. So we might have had the granite stones themselves, but what happens under full moon if there was an intervention? And so she was particularly interested in the idea of becoming stone and things. So she was sewing a cloth which she could then stand in and become part of the stone row. But we took this a little step further, more down where my research ideas were going when we went to Merivale and took a white piece of cloth again, sewed it round one of the stones in the Merivale stone row, and then imagined it out under a full moon there. So becoming part of the stone row or maybe covering the stones ready for a full moon ceremony may have been something which was part of their sacred or ritual life. Not that we would ever know, because that sort of material wouldn't be remaining in the archaeological remains which were there. But it was nice to experiment with these ideas anyway. So being part of the standstill year, as I said, it means that this moon is rising and setting really far to the north and really far to the south. And another one of these sites which has been heavily linked with the moon during standstill year is the Nine Maidens Stone Circle. And this is down in West Cornwall, and you're on the Penwith Moors. That's a stone circle there with a rocky outcrop in the distance called Carngalva. Now, Carngalva and Nine Maidens and the monuments around it, the barrows and things like that, have all been grouped together as being seen a processional way between the monuments and this sacred hilltop. And certainly the late Andy Jones and John Barnett have written about that relationship between that hilltop and the remaining monuments in that landscape. I've also done some research up there, and I realised that there is a relationship between Carngalva and some of the monuments and the sky. In particular, my focus in the past has been around what's called a framing station and the sun. And so this is the framing station. It's over on Little Galva, and at the equinox, the sun shines through the framing station. There it is setting over Carngalva. So that sunlight is then coming in and through the framing station, but the sun actually rolls down the spine of Carngalva to the right. It takes about 14 minutes to have this roll down effect before it finally sets. So it seems that there was an interest between the people who left the monuments in the landscape and what was going on in the sky at the time. So I felt it was worthwhile starting to investigate the moon and a relationship perhaps between the moon, which has been suggested between the moon and the stone circle, and Carngalva. I was there back in 2022, and this was a full moon set. So I'm there first thing in the morning at dawn, and Carngalva's just off to the right there, and this is the stone circle, and you can see that the full moon is going to set as per that black line. It's not going to get quite as close to Carngalva as it would do within a standstill year. So each year, as we moved from 2022 towards the standstill year, that moon would move towards the right of that photo, and it would be setting further right along the horizon. So it'd be setting further to the north. Eventually suggested as setting on Carngalva itself. There was myself again on that morning. One of the interesting things, you can just see the moon there in the middle with Carngalva. One of the interesting things was, as the moon was moving into set, the sun itself rose behind me, casting my shadows in the direction of the moon and Carngalva. So that was quite a nice phenomenological aspect of what was going on in the landscape at that point. And you could see if people were going to make processional walks towards Carngalva. They could have done it as a dawn walk with that sunlight at their back, their shadows stretching in front of them, and the moon starting to set in the direction of Carngalva. It made me interested in the idea of moon shadows, something else that I haven't had a huge amount of time to go out and explore. Moon shadows would be pointing in the other direction, but I would have had to been there a little bit earlier as well. But certainly under full moon, you get some fantastic moon shadows when you're out and about. Now, this is a rendition of what that northern standstill, the position of that moon would have been like in January this year. So this was this visit that we went out, a group of us went out onto the moor to watch this moon set first thing in the morning. Unfortunately, it was pretty dismal weather, and I'd already been out in the December, and I've been out since at different moon phases, but with each phase it puts you at a different time of day, and quite a half of the moon phases will have moon setting in the daytime, so you're not going to see it anyway. The other half are going to be at really weird times of the night, so you're only going to make the journey if you know that you're really going to capture what you're after. And this is a kind of a collation of my attempts to get out there and see that moon set. And all of them have either been clouded out or completely rained out. Now, not everything is lost, because I'm going to be out there next week. Now, it's probably going to be raining, but I will also try again in January to get that moon set, a bit like I did back in 2022, but with that moon further to the northern position of where it is now. Because, as I said, there isn't going to be a chance to record it again for another 18.6 years, and it would be really nice to record this one and share with everyone what goes on up on that ridgeway with the Nine Maidens and Carngalva and the moon itself. So I think that is me. That's me at the Merry Maidens under another full moon. So I've been lots of places this last year and a half, done lots of moon stuff. That's my website. I've got a walk for the winter solstice on the 21st of December, and I'm also helping lead a walk on the 1st of January in the afternoon, which is a Casting Cas crossover walk. And I don't think we're taking bookings for that until the 10th of December, though. So please do look out for the booking opportunity of that one because you have to book in as well. And if you want to book for my walk for the winter solstice, if you can go to my website, I'm happy to take any questions. Oops, go out of that one. There we go.
Caroline, that was absolutely marvelous. Thank you so much. There's so many things that arise out of that. But before I go through the chat questions, I'll just make some quick announcements, one of which you've just made for me, which is about the winter walk, so that's great. The next Cornwall Archaeological Society lecture is on the 11th of December at 7 p.m. and it's Helen. I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, but I think it's Helen Jench, and she's going to be talking about Egyptian conservation in the field. As she has flies in the title, I think we can all see where that's going. The next Cornwall Archaeology Online lecture is on the 27th of January, and Henrietta Quinnell is going to be look at the implications of the catastrophic fire at Muss Farm in the late Bronze Age and what that has, the implications that has for the archaeology of southwest Britain, which is going to be fascinating, I think. Right, so let's have a look at the chat questions, which for some reason... Here we go. Right. Lots of people saying hi, Caroline. Right, I'm getting down to a real question now. Lots saying hi, Caroline. Jackie Nowakowski. There are similar yellow clays as definitive layers recorded at Gaverigan Barrow, which was excavated by CAU in 1991, which is also in the St Austell upland area.
Yeah, I think the visibility of those barrows, particularly from some of those sites off Bodmin Moor, and the idea of the moon sweeping across them is quite tantalising. And but yeah, I've been trying to keep a list, but thank you, Jackie, if I've missed that one off the list.
It's something that I was talking about this afternoon. Well, we were talking about this afternoon, and how that landscape has so completely and utterly changed because of China clay extraction. You know, you have to sort of pick what information you can get out of there. Mel Stark, there was some yellow clay at Castilie.
Oh, fantastic.
Excavations. So that is of interest.
It is, yeah.
Then Jackie Nowakowski says the materiality of monuments, which identifies multiple natural resources, which brought together to become composite parts of monuments, is very much part of the living legacy and tradition of ceremonial monuments of the early Bronze Age landscape. So, just a minute. Right. So your research on looking at colour and the Moonlit Monuments is tremendously interesting. It goes without saying, yes, it is tremendously interesting. And I think you particularly hit on, we don't look at the sky at night, do we? And we can't look at the sky at night because there's so much light pollution. And I think this is a really important aspect of archaeology that you're going for. That's my opinion. So there we go. Then Nika says, could the quartz idea relate to Iron Age hill forts?
Yeah, it's interesting. I know Walthamstow Bury, it's a site that the Cornwall Heritage Trust have just acquired, but when Zoe did her report on it, the inner bank, that was covered in quartz, I think. And to be visible, well, it is fairly visible from miles around, particularly from that northern end of Walthamstow. So Walthamstow is kind of a Tamar Valley way. So you're overlooking towards Devon, you can see Lundy, you can see Dartmoor, Bodmin Moor. But yeah, with that inner bank, if it was covered in white quartz, the visibility of that at night would be incredible. So yeah, I don't see why it couldn't extend into later monuments as well. And um, when I was in America recently, I was fortunate enough to have a walk with a Navajo guide in Canyon de Chelly, which is Navajo land, and you have to be taken in with one of their members of their community. And within that, they have a clay house, but their clay is white, and it's completely covered in white clay. It's up in the cliff, the red cliff side. And I said to him, "Why do you think they've covered it in clay?" I didn't want to give a leading question. And he said, "Oh, that's so we could see it at full moon. We know where to find it down the canyon. You can see it from the other end of the canyon at the full moonlight." So I think this is something, it was just obvious to them that that's why they would use such a color. Make it stand out, and for people wandering around under moonlight, which is something I think we've kind of lost.
Yeah, and well, up and down the country, different archaeological sites, there's always been this, oh, we found this load of quartz. Well, it wasn't there by accident, was it?
No.
And there's something to do with quartz in water as well.
Right.
I sort of only half remember. I'd have to go and look that up a bit more to have something cogent to say about it. Anyway, Mel Stark also says Stonehenge was chalk banked. And Pam's iPad. Thank you, Carolyn, for a really interesting talk. I will take far more interest in moonlight. Stuart Dale says, I believe there is a lot of quartz at Cardinum too.
Okay. Yeah.
And Jackie Nowakowski, wonderful talk, Carolyn. I'm getting images in front of the words. Lots of things to think about. Thank you. I think that's absolutely true. I mean, Carolyn, your approach is not novel, but it's more in depth than a lot of other approaches to astronomy and archaeology. And I mean, dare I say this, it's more realistic. It's more what people would have seen.
Yeah,
That's
I
your
think,
approach that I personally really think
yeah.
has value. Anyway, you've got years and years of work ahead of you, haven't you?
Oh, definitely. Full of ideas.
Oh, Journeyman's just said, have you looked at Dulo stone circle, small circle, big stones, all made of quartz?
Yeah,
One of
I
my
realised that that's another Cornwall Heritage Trust site, and yeah, I would love to be up that way under a full moon one night. I'm kind of the other end of Cornwall, so I have to time my
Carolyn,
visits.
I love Dulo. If you're going there, let me know. I'll come with you.
Oh, fabulous.
One of my favourite stone circles. And Stuart Doug says, Carolyn, work is just what we need to enlarge our horizons.
Oh,
Thank you,
thank you,
Carolyn. Oh,
Stuart.
it's Carolyn's work. Yeah. Yes. You're absolutely right, Stuart, with that one. Well, thank you again. I'm
Thank
so
you.
let me twist your arm to give this lecture because it's been a great addition to our programme. And I hope you'll come back at some other stage.
Yeah. Give me a year or two to do some more work.
Oh, hang on. Somebody, Robin Paris. Oh, really interesting, Carolyn. Thanks. Are you looking just at yellow clay when backlit by moonlight or thinking of viewing them, e.g., clay lines lit from Bodmin?
Oh, I don't know, Robin. We'll have to have a chat about that.
I don't know if you can see lots of claps are coming up on the
Oh,
screen as
fantastic.
well. and the congratulatory message. Right, okay, we'll have to end this now. And I'd just like to say to you all, have a lovely Christmas and hopefully see you again in the new year. Thank you, Carolyn.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.